Dear friends, welcome to another episode of Military Operations. In this video, we'll discuss President Trump's recent statements directed at Vladimir Putin, urging him to sit down and negotiate an end to the invasion of Ukraine, emphasizing that he has only two options: the easy way or the hard way. Just days after resuming the U.S. presidency, Donald Trump adopted a much tougher stance on the war in Ukraine. In a statement made on his social media platform, he threatened severe sanctions and tariffs against Russia if Putin did not agree to end the conflict. In his post, Trump said there are two ways to end the war: the easy way, through negotiations that also meet Ukrainian demands, or the hard way, which according to Trump would involve continued U.S. funding of Ukraine's defense and the imposition of high tariffs and sanctions on all Russian exports. This stance represents a significant escalation in Trump's rhetoric since his presidential campaign, when he promised to end the war within 24 hours of reassuming office. However, he now acknowledges that the process could be much more drawn out. The threat of ongoing defensive support, sanctions, and tariffs is not only an attempt to pressure Putin, but also a move to reaffirm Trump's position as an uncompromising negotiator and defender of American interests. It is worth noting that Trump has historically maintained an ambiguous relationship with Russia. During his first presidency, he often praised Vladimir Putin while facing domestic criticism for adopting a lenient stance toward the Kremlin. These new threats, therefore, signal an attempt to reposition his image in an increasingly complex international landscape. To understand the impact of Trump's threats, we need to examine the history of sanctions against Russia. Since 2022, when the war in Ukraine began, the West has implemented a series of punitive measures targeting key sectors of the Russian economy. These sanctions have included measures such as a price cap on Russian oil and the exclusion of Russian banks from the SWIFT international payment system. These actions were designed to economically isolate Russia and hinder its ability to finance its war machine. Despite these measures, Russia has largely managed to adapt by redirecting energy exports to Asian markets, particularly China and India. While these countries demand discounts of over 40% compared to what Europe previously paid, they still generate billions of dollars in monthly revenues that significantly support Putin's invasion effort in Ukraine. However, economic difficulties in Russia are becoming increasingly evident. Inflation has skyrocketed, interest rates have reached historic levels, and the economy is showing signs of strain, despite the Kremlin's efforts to maintain an appearance of stability. Trump's new threats, including additional sanctions on the oil and gas sector, could directly target the core of the Russian economy. The Kremlin's response to Trump's threats was swift and dismissive. Dmitry Peskov, Putin's spokesperson, stated that there was nothing new in the American president's statements, suggesting that the Kremlin views these threats as a continuation of the Western policies Russia has faced since 2022. Despite economic difficulties and a growing shortage of human resources, the Kremlin is heavily betting on its ability to transform the country into a self-sufficient wartime economy. Putin is increasingly committed to fully militarizing Russia's economy and society, as evidenced by the approximately 40% of Russia's 2025 budget being allocated to the war. This has forced drastic cuts in government investments in critical sectors such as healthcare, education, and civilian infrastructure. Western estimates suggest that around 500,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or injured in the war. For comparison, the United States lost just over 400,000 soldiers during World War II, while simultaneously fighting Germany and Japan. Nevertheless, the Russian government has managed to recruit new fighters, often appealing to patriotism or offering financial benefits to families. This demonstrates that, despite the high human and economic costs, the Kremlin is determined to continue the war until its strategic objectives are achieved. Putin's demands to end the war remain rigid and virtually non-negotiable, including international recognition of the illegally annexed territories, Ukraine's permanent neutrality, and complete demilitarization, conditions that are clearly unacceptable to Kiev and its Western allies, who insist on preserving Ukraine's territorial sovereignty. Putin's perspective on the conflict is deeply rooted in his unique interpretation of history and ideological concepts reminiscent of the expansionist period of Tsarist Imperial Russia. He sees the war as an opportunity to reverse what he considers Western intrusion into Russia's post-imperial and post-Soviet space. Meanwhile, Trump attempts to frame his proposals as a pragmatic path to peace. However, the stark differences between American and Russian visions make any agreement highly challenging. Furthermore, analysts suggest that Trump's threats may be perceived by the Kremlin as pressure tactics lacking real substance, reinforcing the view that the United States is more focused on domestic politics than international diplomacy. During his campaign, Trump repeatedly claimed he would resolve the war quickly, but after taking office, Trump acknowledged that the process would take much longer, with his threats of additional sanctions reflecting this shift in stance and demonstrating the difficulty of addressing such a complex conflict. Putin, on the other hand, appears to view Trump's statements as more of the same. For the Russian leader, the war is much more than a regional conflict. It is an attempt to redefine the global balance of power. With Ukraine seeking security guarantees to prevent future Russian aggression and Russia demanding territorial recognition and neutrality, the stalemate seems far from resolution. Trump, with his recent threats, appears to be realizing that negotiating with the Russians will be extremely challenging. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure to do so now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates.